welcome once again to Take Fountain. The subject today is Scarface. My friend and co-host of this program, Thom Mount, was what was it called? The president of Universal Worldwide. Is that correct?
That is absolutely
correct. I'm going to take you back to 1983, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you're embarking on what will be one of the great gangster movies, if not one of the great movies of all time. But you don't know that at this stage. At this stage,
that would be an understatement.
At this stage, you're doing a remake, if that's the right word, of the old Scarface, the old Howard Hawks Scarface, which was a movie basically about Capone, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a book in 1929 by a guy named Armitage Trail, and Armitage Trail had a bestseller adapted from the life of Al Capone. And in 1932, Howard Hawks finished his film version of that book called Scarface, and it was released, and it was a hit.
Now, how does this all begin? Because I wouldn't think anybody really, in 1932, I mean, talkies have only been around a few years. I can't believe that there'd be a lot of people clamoring to remake Scarface at this stage.
I would say none, except one really important person put this all together, and that person is Al Pacino.
So this was really, so many of your stories don't begin with an actor. They begin with a script, a producer, you.
Yeah.
So this is really Pacino's thing. Huh?
You left out A Drunken Night in Van Nuys.
Yes,
right?
Yes, okay. A lot of things, a lot of inspiration.
Okay,
but usually Usually it's not an actor. An actor comes later in the process.
Okay, so here, intersection of two fortuitous things. One is Howard Hawks makes this movie, but the producer of the movie was Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes had not yet bought RKO. He was about to. But he was making movies and distributing through United Artists, which was famously founded by Chaplin and Mary Pickford.
Pickford and Chaplin,
right,
and Fairbanks.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he owned the pictures, Howard Hughes. That means when he purchased RKO, he threw this picture into the RKO library. So along the way, Universal, an insatiable television machine,
right,
if nothing else,
right,
started scooping up other people's libraries. And we bought a big chunk of the RKO library. We also bought, by the way, all the pre-48 Paramount library, the entire thing.
Yeah.
And on and on. So we now own Scarface. Al Pacino, in the last 79 or 80, watches Scarface on somewhere he told me, in the Tiffany Theater on Sunset Boulevard, which no longer exists.
So he's on Sunset Boulevard. He's going to some sort of oldies show, some sort of like a classic
revival.
Film night.
Like a revival.
And he sees for the first time Scarface from 1932.
And thinks it's a great idea. So he calls his manager, Marty Bregman, who you may probably know.
I do, yeah.
And he says to Marty, I want to make this picture. This is a great picture. Let's do it. I want to do it with Lumet. Remember that Al Pacino and Lumet are...
Sidney Lumet, who did Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon.
Yep.
And so they already had a relationship.
They already had a relationship.
Okay.
They're friends. They're part of theater in New York. They're part of a lot of things.
Right.
And Al is a terrific guy, by the way, and easy to work with. And so all that being said, now Lumet comes on board, and he looks at the old picture, and Al had originally envisioned doing this as a period piece with him playing a Capone-like mobster back in the day. That goes out the window with Lumet, who says, what, are you crazy? You've got the boat criminals being sent to Miami by the Cuban government. The Marilista movement used that.
Yeah. Also, you're never going to out-Godfather the Godfather at that stage.
That's right. That's right.
So nobody's going to be like, no, if it even smells a little bit like the Godfather, it'll always be unfavorably compared.
And so Sidney said, you're Cuban, you're going to play Cuban, this is the movie. However, Sidney then started trying to make a deal around what was going to happen with the movie with Marty Bregman, and that blew up. As you may remember, Marty Bregman was famously, shall we say, difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So Sidney's out, but the idea for the movie sticks. Al is committed to playing a Cuban.
Okay.
Who comes over, part of that whole cocaine cowboy movement in Miami.
Right.
So now they go to Brian De Palma. Brian De Palma says,
Wait, is there a script at this stage?
no,
No script.
there's no
You're
script.
just walking around saying, "Hey, it's a Cuba." It's
But-
you know how they're sending all those criminals over from Cuba. He's one of those guys, and he builds an empire.
It's a little better than that because Sidney Lumet got a hold of Oliver Stone before he left the picture. And
okay.
he said, Oliver, not only are you going to write this, here's why it's important. And he showed Oliver the culture clash that could be buried in a gangster movie that would make a really interesting, provocative story.
Right.
Not just a thin gangster picture, not just
Yeah.
a thin action picture, but indeed something about the way our culture was changing, which is very Sidney,
Yeah.
you know?
Right. Sure.
So now Sidney's out, and Pacino approves Brian De Palma. Brian comes in, he works with Oliver. Then we start sending various people, myself included, to Miami. Oliver and I go down and take a look. Bregman comes down and takes a look. We hang out in Miami with DEA agents and crooks and criminals and corrupt judges, and we meet all kinds of insane people. And out of that comes a very rich
So you
tapestry.
wander around meeting people that
Yeah.
might be a part of this journey. Were you a Cuban criminal who was an immigrant?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and all kinds
And
of.
what do you learn? I mean, what?
Well, here's the thing we learn. Oliver and I, we meet there's a federal judge who's rumored to be corrupt. So we arranged to have dinner with him in a good restaurant. And in fact, not such a good restaurant in Miami, in Shula's, which you will remember when you
Yeah.
were at Don Shula's steak joint.
Yeah, sure.
And so we go to Shula's with
you go
this
to
guy.
Shula's. Yeah, okay,
with
fine.
This fucking guy, and he's a federal judge, and my dad's a lawyer. I expect judges to be,
Yeah, sure.
probity and upright, and
It's a sense of decorum.
the
Exactly.
way I used to feel about the Supreme Court until this week, and so I say to the guy, tell us about how you deal with this pressure from criminals. People must try to bribe you and stuff like that. And he says, oh, yeah, they try, but we just blow it off. It's nothing. And gradually he gets drunker and drunker. And finally he says, I really love hanging out with you guys. Love to do this again. So we leave, and Oliver and I look at each other and go, get him back.
Yeah.
So we get him back. And this time he starts drinking a lot earlier.
Mm.
This time we know what we're doing. We know
Right.
what we're fishing for.
Right.
So he says, well, they offered me $800,000 to make sure this guy doesn't go to jail. And I said, no. And then a few minutes later and several drinks later, he said, then they offered me $1.2 million to make sure this guy doesn't go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, they brought me a Panamanian bank account, numbered account, passbook with $2 million in it. And I said, yes.
And he just says this to you.
Over dinner, drunk.
I wonder what makes a person do. Okay, so he must figure, you guys are movie guys, so we're all in this together or
Well,
something.
exactly.
What?
We're all criminals.
Or a bunch of criminals. You
That's
guys
right.
are movie producers,
Nice,
so you can't be on.
please.
You can't get on your high horse, right?
No,
Yeah.
there is no horse. Okay, so now.
So you discover what a corrupt cesspool Miami politics and the criminal justice system.
we have
is.
another complication, and that is Oliver is in the midst of a very intense cocaine addiction at this
okay.
time.
All right.
And he's writing, and I love Oliver, and we've been friends for years. We are friends for years.
Yeah.
And I've known him when he, couldn't get arrested and was writing his first script, and when I couldn't get a job, and we,
Yeah.
we used to hang out. We both knew an agent. She had a job. She would buy us dinner by making dinner at her house. That's how we ate.
Right.
It's Hollywood.
Yeah,
You
sure.
got it takes a process to get in.
Yeah.
So Oliver decides that the best way for him to shake this addiction and to finish the script is to go to Paris. I agreed with that. Hanging in L.A. was not healthy for O. Stone.
Okay. So he goes to
So-
Paris to get away from all of his friends who have drugs and
Right.
whatever.
And he writes the script, and he does a great job.
Right.
And the script comes in, and it's not there's not a lot to do because it's terrific. De Palma makes his contribution. Bregman has his comments. Everybody has comments. We get past that, and we start to budget the movie. And the movie's now costing, in those days, $25 million. Now, that doesn't sound like much money today
Right.
when we're throwing billions around, when you have to,
Oh yeah.
when the maker of our producer, Pat's Tesla,
Yes.
is worth multiple billions of dollars.
Many billions of dollars. My first thought came to my mind was, Sidney Lumet would have been a terrible choice to direct this picture.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I love Sidney. And
because he's way too sort of socially conscious. He'd be trying to put a lesson into things. He's a big liberal.
All
this
true.
needed somebody who's meat and potatoes, blood and guts kind of guy. And De Palma was the right guy for this picture.
Say hello to my little friend Brian.
Yeah.
So that's all I can say.
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
So Brian was exactly the right guy to direct this picture. We had a lot of heat. Part of the heat we had was at the studio, I was getting killed. I was on the board of the Mexican-American Legal Defense Fund,
Okay.
among other things. Because as you know, I am the last of the limousine liberals.
I know you are.
Yeah,
Yes.
just a card. I have
You're
a card that
proud
says it.
limousine liberal.
Proud
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
So now I have Al Pacino, Mr. Italy, playing a Cuban in a movie that's all about issues that are very, very dear to the Gusano community in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention,
You're about to do the worst portrayal of a Cuban ever presented in a major motion picture.
that's what the Florida Tourist Board told me. and so
So your problem is a little bit like what happened with The Godfather, which is
yeah.
the Italians all went, what the hell?
I know.
All right, go ahead. Go
So
ahead.
we decided in our wisdom we're going forward.
Yeah.
Fuck them.
Yeah.
It is, after all, theater.
Sure.
The nature of that
Yeah.
means people can transform. It's transformative.
Right.
So we put together, Bregman does a great job, by the way, of pushing for really good people. And, I want to throw one thing in here for our producer, Pat, and that is, I don't know if he knows that Brian De Palma and Jay Cox, the movie critic, co-wrote and rewrote the entire crawl for the first Star Wars movie.
Ah.
So I just throw that in because these guys were part of a team. The
Right.
point here is Spielberg, Lucas, De Palma,
Yeah.
Marty Scorsese,
Yeah.
a few other directors. There was a gang
Yeah.
of young directors out of film schools like USC and UCLA who were taking over Hollywood. It
Yeah.
was the 70s,
Yeah.
and they were all part of that.
So the middle of the
movement.
70s, all these people are emerging.
Yeah.
Early middle of 70s.
So we end up with Giorgio Moroder
Oh,
doing
yeah.
the score, which is a great idea, I think,
Yeah.
because not only does he understand what hip hop is, which was a brand new idea out there in the
Right.
world, he also works with synthesizers. He's also capable of doing astonishing music. And Johnny Alonso comes in to shoot it. I remind you that Johnny Alonso shot Chinatown.
Ah. So you've got some big people.
Got people who know what they're doing.
Moroder forgive me if I just don't know everything. Well, I almost know everything, but not everything.
I thought you knew
Giorgio
everything.
Moroder, isn't he the spaghetti western guy, or is that a different person? Who's Giorgio Moroder?
I think, well, you're thinking probably of Ennio Morricone.
That's who I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. All right.
Okay.
Then that's now you see how my mind works.
No,
Giorgio
that's all right.
Moroder did what would
But
be
they're both Italian. This
That's
is good.
close enough.
That's
Yeah,
close
so-
enough.
exactly.
Okay. So we have, and Moroder did actually win an Academy Award for a score, but I can't remember the life of me. Pat, do you know what the picture was that Moroder won an Academy Award for before he did Scarface?
I'm on it.
I'm on it.
He's on it.
He's on it. Okay, well, all's right with the world.
Okay. So anyway, enough with me trying to guess who Giorgio
Jerry
Moroder.
Greenberg's the editor. He's a terrific
Yes,
editor.
I
He
know who
did
that
French
is.
Connection. He did
Yeah.
Apocalypse Now, which is
Sure.
a brilliant editing job and a tough one.
Yeah.
So we start to make the movie. We're shooting pieces. The movie is, shall we say, a little violent.
Yes.
I anticipate at this moment that I might have a bit of a sticky wicket with the ratings board. The Motion Picture Association of America has a ratings board.
Right.
The problem in those days is the worst thing that could happen to you for a rating is that you get an X.
Yes.
What an X meant was either the film is literal pornography or they have deemed its content to be so repugnant to the national escutcheon that they're not going to release the damn thing. And the way they kill the release is no newspaper or television
Yes.
channel in America will take advertising
That's
for
right.
an X-rated picture.
That's exactly right.
So you can't tell anybody you've got one. I mean, you can show it in the
So how
theater.
did that happen? I'm way off. I'm all over the place today. So how did it happen with?
Wait, guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Giorgio Moroder won Academy Award for Midnight Express.
Midnight Express.
There you go.
Midnight Express. That's it. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Pat, thank you.
So how did Midnight Cowboy get released if it was got an X? How did that happen?
At that same moment in history that Midnight Cowboy comes out with an X, Behind the Green Door
Yes.
and Deep Throat are
Yes.
both coming out with X's.
Right.
And they create such a cultural firestone,
Yeah.
such water cooler talk, such,
Yeah.
rumor and innuendo that people show up to see them.
Isn't it funny? There was a moment in time where those movies, you had to go see those movies.
Yes.
Like now it'd be like there'd be a lot of shame involved in it, and
Yeah.
how could you possibly? But when I was in college, we went to see Behind the Green Door.
Well, Jackie Kennedy went to Deep Throat on
Yeah.
Times Square.
There you go. So I mean, it was a different world.
It was
Carry
a different
on.
world. And
Scarface.
so now the dailies are coming in and they're, shall we say, violent. And the language is a little rough. In fact, the word fuck in that movie is used 126 times,
Really?
just to let you know.
Wow.
That's in the released version. We took out another 418 times before we got to that.
And he
So-
leans on that word in that movie. It's like,
There's also another thing here. The original film of Scarface, the Howard Hawks picture,
right.
this film is dedicated to Howard Hawks and Ben Hecht. Ben Hecht wrote the
Sure,
original.
yeah.
De Palma understood that he needed to nod to the forefathers of the gangster genre.
Right.
And in its day, the original Howard Hawks movie was wild. It was violent. It was tough. People shot each other.
Yeah.
Gunfire, mayhem,
Yeah.
rough language for the day.
Yeah.
And so this was
That's
in
also a
some way-
pre-code film.
That's right. It was a pre-code film, and this was an extension of that kind of sensibility.
Yeah. Right.
So we go to New York. We premiere the thing on December 1st, 1983. We shot it in 82 mostly, and a little bit of
Wait. I'm sorry to do this to you, but I got to know that big mansion. I mean, that he shoots up. That the whole place.
Sosa's Empire. Right.
Yeah, it's just the coolest place, just the greatest place. Where is that exactly?
Well, deep in the jungles of Colombia, or on a street right down from Oprah's house in Montecito, California, which is where we shot it.
Now, I can see that being a Montecito mansion now that
Yeah.
I think about it.
Yeah, with some additional greens to
So,
make it look
so
a
I
little more
assume
tropical.
I assume that everything that final scene where he's say hello to my little friend and
Mm.
everything's getting shot up and blown up and everything. That's some sort of studio situation.
That's a stage, yeah.
That's a stage.
At
That must have been a
at
wild stage to
Universal.
be a part of.
Yes, that was, the whole thing was wild.
I'll bet.
So now we have a cut of the movie. Before we can get to that date on December 1st and actually release this to the public, I have to get a rating that is not an X.
Yeah.
So
Is it a bunch of different scenes that are the problem? Is it the final scene? Is it the
it's, think of this as an Italian wedding cake. This is so many layers of problem you can't imagine.
Yeah.
It took me maybe 3 or 4 months of constant negotiation. So here's the way we did it. And Brian De Palma understood that we had a huge problem, and he made some compromises. We took out the 415 extra fucks. We left in 126.
right?
We then pulled something that bordered on nudity back a little bit. Then we tried to listen. We went to hell in a handbasket with the shower scene when we start up that
Oh, the
home light chainsaw.
chainsaw. Yes. Yeah, that's a
And
horrifying scene.
That is a horrifying scene, and the one you see represents about 1/4 of the scene we originally presented to the ratings
oh
board.
my gosh.
Yeah, no wonder they fainted.
Yeah.
So now we're getting tagged for violence, for vulgarity, for all kinds of stuff. And
Even
it's-
just the way he talks to Michelle Pfeiffer's character in it is
Yes.
just so horrible.
yes,
By the way, she's fantastic. Who would have thought to cast her? I would
Yeah.
have thought that, when I first heard she was in it, I was like, that's a strange choice.
yeah, she
But
was.
it isn't when you watch the movie.
No,
it's a
she's great
fantastic
in
choice.
it, and it breaks her career out, and she's great in it.
Yeah.
And
But was she a first choice for this picture?
No, the director and the producer didn't want her, but finally, Bregman came around, and then eventually De Palma came around, and then
Well, who would have been somebody they would have thought?
well,
would be better?
we talked to a number.
somebody
of people.
less shiksa, probably.
We
huh?
talked to Sharon Stone.
Oh,
we
well,
talked
that's in the same vein.
we talked to Sigourney Weaver.
Oh,
We talked to a bunch of actresses who
I
were
see.
hot at that time.
Yeah.
Uh,
I can't imagine it without her.
she's great in it.
Yeah.
And part of the reason she's great in it is she is icy cold.
She's icy cold.
And she carries the aura of cocaine addiction.
Yeah, she's so convincingly high.
So I asked
Yeah.
Oliver once what happened to her after the movie's over, and he said it's easy. She remained a cocaine addict for another 10 years, ended up somewhere in a whorehouse, and committed suicide.
That's what would have happened to the real character.
Yeah.
Do directors and writers, do they have that? In other words, like that's the end of this, but in my mind,
No, yeah, almost always.
20 years from now, they are
Almost
this.
always.
Is
You
that
want to
right?
know. You want to know where people are going to go because
know,
you need the character.
I talked to a writer once, and he says, if you don't know what brand of cigarette, because this is, back when people smoked, if you don't know what brand of cigarette your character smokes, you don't know the character well enough. And I
Yeah.
always thought that was kind of an interesting point.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
So now I want to convert this process we're in a little bit and talk about data. I know
Data.
that's a very exciting subject.
I love data. You mean
Yeah.
the data on the movie?
Yeah, I just want to talk to you about data.
Yeah, okay.
So we finally get to open the damn thing.
Right.
We open in 900 plus or minus theaters.
Which is a big opening.
Big enough.
And also this is weird too. And I'm sorry to keep stopping you, but
That's
I love
fine.
this movie
Stop me
so
all
much.
you want.
This is a Christmas movie.
Damn right.
This,
our
I
present.
went back and looked at it, and I thought this came out on December 9th, 1983.
That's right.
Who thought that this would be a good Christmas movie? This is not a Christmas movie.
Well, whoever the idiot was, who was
it was running the
president
studio.
of Universal Worldwide.
So you thought
that
it was a
person
Christmas movie.
I thought it was a Christmas. I thought it was
Is
a
that what they
gift.
call counter programming?
I guess it qualifies. That sounds like a reasonably convenient excuse.
It just happened to be when the
I
movie
had
was
no
done by.
good idea.
Right.
The movie was done. It was an expensive movie. We needed to get it out. I had a lot of naysayers in my distribution company who thought it was too wild and rough and awful,
Yeah.
and people wouldn't like it. There was no sense that it would blow up, which it did, and take off. Thank God. Let me just say, that picture did, in its first release in the U.S., $45 to $50 million, right in there. And international, because we released it day and date worldwide, picked up another $65 million. So by the time the first few weeks of release were over, we were north of $100 million. That was gigantic in those days. That was gigantic in those days.
Yeah, that's huge.
were like
So
100
very
and-
smart move on that
110,
president of
120.
Universal's part.
Well, whoever, if we can find him, I think that would be. So let me also say,
Wait, let me before you. I'm sorry because I'm obsessed
Yeah.
about this movie. Stephen Bauer. In this movie.
Rocky Bauer,
He's-
what a great guy.
He plays the greatest Neanderthal I've
Yes.
ever seen.
Yes.
And that scene for when they're getting off the boat and he's
Yes.
hitting on women just
Oh, yeah.
right and left, and,
Yeah.
and if they don't go with him, he calls them lesbians, and
Yeah.
that makes me shriek. He is so fantastic in
He
this.
is fantastically awful.
He is
He's
just a
really-
terrible human being, and you can't
Yeah.
get enough of him.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, I've said my piece. Go ahead.
3.7 million DVD sales in the first release. 3.7 million. The DVD cost $78.
Oh my gosh,
Hello.
that's real money.
Yeah, that's real money. In addition to the fact that it's a box office hit, it's a DVD monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of thing you keep around and you watch it once a year because you love it. It's one of your favorite movies. Yeah, because I'm sure I've heard people say that that's the best movie.
Right around Christmas time.
Yeah, right. It's a Christmas.
It's a good Christmas. Yes, it's
Just-
a
sorry.
lovely Christmas sentiment to watch
Well, I say,
Scarface
you know,
with the family, with the whole
Yeah.
family.
It kind of put on the Yule log and turn on
With
Scarface.
the kids in front of the TV and watch Scarface.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And by the way, I should also add that every time a new DVD format came out, like Pat's favorite format, Blu-ray, then we would pick up another $80 million or 100.
Well,
I mean, it just
the
was-
industry did go through that, right? The same way with the CD. Like you had
Yeah.
to keep buying the white album, and now
Yeah.
was the CD, and it was, I had it on 8-track, and there
Yeah.
was cassette. Yeah, okay, you're
so
right.
the other way that movies are measured in their first weekend of performance is to see what they do every day
Mm-hmm.
on the key days. And the key days are Friday and Saturday. Those are the key days. So what did the picture do? So a gigantic monster hit if you could translate it in today's dollars and you released Gone with the Wind in 3,000 or 4,000 screens, then on those days it would be doing 8,000 per screen average a day, maybe 9. Those numbers were stratospheric. We opened around 5,000 a day, which was massive.
Yeah.
Which was great. And the good news about that is it got all the other exhibitors to fall in line.
Right.
We went from 900 theaters to thousands of theaters. And that was really important. I should say also that the movie became, of course, a cult classic.
Yes.
It's one of those movies where if people know you had anything to do with Scarface, they start quoting lines
Sure.
to you,
That's right.
you know. And so,
That's you've had that kind of impact a lot. We have a lot of movies like that under your
well,
belt.
you always talk about the difference between naturalism
Yeah.
in writing
Yeah.
and movie writing.
Yeah.
And I'm on your side. Movie writing is very important, but movie writing is make my day.
Yeah, exactly. And I always say this too. I had this conversation with Quentin Tarantino. Used to come on The View in the early days, anyway.
Yeah.
And I said, as somebody who has to pick clips, you get to pick a clip to run these movies today. You can't pick a clip. There's no good clip.
Right.
There's no good 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I said, but a Quentin Tarantino movie, there's
Oh,
a good
yeah.
30 seconds in there because he's making old movies.
That's
I mean,
right.
they maybe have a certain modern sensibility and they may be a little bigger and a little more violent and a little more whatever, but they have movie dialogue and movie scenes, the beginning, middle, and end.
And bigger than life movie characters
Exactly.
and all of that. And that's part of the fun
Yeah.
of going to a big movie. I mean, I know you and I share a huge fondness for The Wild Bunch.
Yes.
The Wild Bunch is no more a Western than it is a movie about outer space.
Yeah, that's right.
It is a movie entirely about friendship, loyalty,
No question.
and what you're willing to do in the face of impossible odds.
Yeah, and in that movie, we'll stop, and William Holden will get off his horse, and he'll give a speech.
Yeah. No. God
You make a
bless him.
commitment to a man, you stick to it, and
That's
it's full of things like that. They'll stop by a campfire and give a speech, and and it's just anyway. You're right. This is a real movie.
So I would say the following things to you. Say hello to my little friend.
Sure.
Repeated everywhere, shows up in hip-hop songs and rap songs to this day all over the place.
Here's what's funny. When I see the movie now, and I saw it a few years ago, I think, it just shows you if a movie is good enough, it will transcend anybody going, I don't like Pacino's accent. I don't like
I know.
I don't like that he's playing a Puerto Rican and Cuban and he makes Cubans look bad or whatever. If the movie's good enough, none of that matters, right?
None of that matters.
Yeah, it's
That's
only
right.
bad movies where that matters.
Well, and let's not go there. But I try to, as worldwide head of Rancho Mirage Media, I got to say I try to avoid going anywhere that has to do with bad movies.
Yeah, right.
So also, the world is yours.
The world is yours.
There's
Yeah.
a phrase that occurs in the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie, at the climax of the movie.
That whole scene where he's sitting there in the restaurant,
Yeah,
and Michelle Pfeiffer is clearly stoned out of her mind,
yeah,
and he starts talking about her polluted womb or whatever it is,
yeah.
and it's just the roughest dialogue. It's just
Horrible.
like, oh my gosh, just awful. And you think, man, that's the kind of thing you don't see anymore. You don't see that sort of stuff in the movies anymore.
So the movie comes out and critics hate it.
Is that right? It's funny. I don't remember that.
Big, important critics hate it. Leonard Maltin, one of the most important critics in America, television critic,
Right, sure, yeah.
blah, blah, hates the damn movie. He says, wallows in excess and unpleasantness. Okay, wallowing. Guilty of
Wallowed
wallowing.
in unpleasantness.
I give up, officer. We're guilty of wallowing. So let me read something to you, though, because I want to get this right. Because David Anson, who's a friend of mine,
Sure.
a great writer,
Yeah.
great critic, said the following about the movie. We got his review in Newsweek. It was one of the best we ever got. He said, among other things, it's a grand, shallow, decadent entertainment which, like all good Hollywood gangster movies, delivers the punch and counterpunch of glamour and disgust.
I like that.
good writing.
That makes sense.
It's also what the movie is.
Yeah, because you want to see that they have this big life, and then you want to see it all crumble around
You
them.
want to get life gets even with them.
Yeah,
you know?
that's right. You want the big palace and the cars and the beautiful girl, and then you want it all taken from them.
That's absolutely right.
I never thought about it until this moment, but that's exactly what you need, isn't it?
And by the way, that's why the movie was such a huge hit in France,
Yeah.
because France is the only country in the world where a guy stands on a street corner on the Champs-Élysées and he sees a Aston Martin convertible pull up, handsome guy, beautiful girl.
Yeah.
They're waiting at the light. He looks at the car. He looks at the girl. He says, God, somebody should take that all away from that son of a bitch. That's France. Welcome to France. So this movie played perfectly.
Played perfectly in France. You know, somebody once told me that it says, you know, whenever you were young and you talked about the Beatles and somebody like John, somebody like Paul, and somebody like George, but there was always one weird guy that thought Ringo was the best Beatle.
Yes.
He says, that's France. France is full of people who think Ringo is the best Beatle.
And that could easily be true.
Yes.
Okay, so then we go through the rating wars, and we've gotten there, and now we have critics, and many of them weren't good. A few of them, by the way. Roger Ebert was kind to us.
Yeah.
And then Kurt Vonnegut and John Irving, two really distinguished authors who I have a lot of respect for,
Yeah.
walked out of the movie, hated it, were offended by the chainsaw scene so badly that they went public with their hatred of the film.
Really?
So we had in the New York Post Vonnegut and Irving saying, "This is a piece
Why are
of
they
junk.
making stuff
Why
like
are
this?"
they? Why Hollywood's? You know, blah
Kind
blah,
of what
blah.
happened after I Spit on Your Grave and a few of those sorts of films where
Yeah.
Ebert and a few others said, we've got to stop making these types of movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, this is obviously a much better movie than I Spit on
Well,
Your Grave.
Yes, and here's the other thing. Many DEA agents have come to me, up to me. I've run into them over the years
Yeah.
of making movies, and they all say it's our favorite film.
Right.
They all say, you have no idea. You didn't go far enough. So
Really?
Miami in the days of the cocaine cowboy, and you know one of these guys, you know John Marcello.
Yes, I do.
And these guys, I got to say, what they endured trying to bring law and order to the cocaine cowboy movement, to the astonishing influx of drugs and the astonishing generation of cash.
Yeah.
And by the way, when that started, cocaine wasn't even illegal in the U.S. It hadn't been listed in the right drug category.
Where does this fall in the scheme of like Miami Vice? Where is that? Is this that same era of Miami Vice?
Miami Vice follows.
Follows it, but like a year or two later. Yeah. So it's all tied up in this weird sort of. There's a strange glamour to it, though, isn't there? It's like Miami Vice had this sort of glamour thing to it. This movie has a certain glamour thing to it.
Yeah.
And here's what I don't understand: the Cuban population of Miami embraces it, or says this is the worst thing that's ever happened to us.
Well, here's what happens: everybody over 50 hates it. Everybody under 50 loves it.
Right.
Cuban youth totally on our side.
Right.
But if you go to a restaurant like Versailles in Little Havana, in the section of Miami, you still see, in those days, you would still see old men wearing a cardboard sign that said, I was Minister of Agriculture in the Batista administration. And everybody walking in the restaurant would give them $20.
Oh.
So the Gusano population, the older tribe, were horrified by this.
Right.
They wanted the dignity of one of the Caribbean's most corrupt administrations.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of that story of Scorsese after he made Goodfellas, and he went to his favorite restaurant up in the Bronx or whatever, with that Italian, Arthur Avenue or something, and they wouldn't let him in. Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah.
Of
They
course.
said, you know what? And he's like, they welcomed everybody from The Godfather. That was
Right.
fine, but not Goodfellas. That's over the line.
So now I want to bring into this conversation about Scarface one of my favorite miscreants across the world, Saddam Hussein.
Uh-huh.
So Saddam Hussein, as you probably observed, looted the treasury of his nation.
Sure.
hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars
Yeah.
taken out and laundered with the help of a lot of drug dealers around the world. So when Saddam Hussein was finally nailed by our government and passed on, and we went through all of the details of where he hid his money and what happened, it turned out that he had a holding company chartered in several neutral nations that wouldn't prosecute anyone. It was called Montana Management.
Oh, wow.
It was Saddam Hussein's favorite movie.
Oh, my gosh. How come you didn't use that on the ad? Now that's
I know.
two thumbs up, says Saddam Hussein.
Right. I think that would have been pushing a little bit. I already had a lot of people in my distribution company who wanted to shoot me for
Yeah, I'll
making this
bet.
movie. So, what can you do?
I can see where that would have been for you a dangerous thing. Like you had to dance a little close to
Listen,
the edge to green light a picture like this.
Well, here's the thing. I got this job at Universal. I had no idea whether I was going to last a day or a year.
Yeah.
I had no expectations. I very quickly moved up to head of production in 3 years, and by year four, I was president of the company. I stayed president of the company for 9 years.
Which, by the way, is like a lifetime in your business.
It's a lifetime.
Because the average is what, 2 years, 3
Two-
years?
3 years.
3
is the
years,
average.
yeah.
So
Okay.
I did 3 administrations effectively there, and
Right.
then I got to say, my attitude from the very beginning was, I'm going to make the things that I think are important, that I think will work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to steer by my star, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for doing this stuff because when I came to Universal, I was 23. And the average age of the Universal senior executive was 55.
Right.
So there was just a little bit of a spread there.
Yeah.
And, they took one look at me, and one of the senior executives said, we have to have him investigated by the FBI, which they did. And it turned out that I had been arrested for civil rights demonstration stuff in the 60s,
Yeah.
but that was it. Otherwise, I wasn't a notorious criminal.
Right.
And so if you're going to go down that road,
Mm-hmm.
meaning try to have power in Hollywood and make your mark on something,
Right.
you have to be prepared to die on that hill.
Yes. I don't know if you're going to get to this or not, but I know Al Pacino sent you something because you've told me this before.
Oh, well, we're going to get to that. Let's go to Al Pacino in just a second. Before
Okay.
we do that, I
Okay.
just want to say there's also a very successful video game because there are all these spin-offs from
There was
that
a
movie.
Scarface video game.
There was
I
there
don't
were
remember.
several, but there
Okay.
was one called The World Is Yours,
Oh, okay.
which was a
Okay.
breakout video game and all
Right.
that stuff. So let's go to Al Pacino making this movie. First of all, Al Pacino is one of the nicest, decent,
Very pleasant man.
very good guy. Very
Yeah.
good guy. And Sidney Lumet and I are friends, and so Al and Sidney are friends, and it's all made sense.
The funny thing with Pacino is that, like, I've only been around him a couple of times, but he's a very quiet man.
Yes.
He's a very quiet, low-key, he plays these larger-than-life characters.
Oh.
He's this quiet little man,
So Sidney talked to me about Al before we did the movie, and he said, just remember that Al will get completely immersed in this character.
Yeah.
And that happens on every movie, and just respect it. Just give him space.
He stays in character.
Tell your crew he stays in character. Leave him alone.
I've
let
always
him
heard
do his
about
stuff.
that.
Yeah, and in true, it's true. He became Tony Montana, and he was Tony Montana.
Yeah.
And so we're shooting in Montecito at the self-same mansion you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And I'm at home. It's about 5:30 in the morning, and I get a call from my unit manager on the shoot, and he says, listen, we've got a problem. Mr. Pacino won't come out of his trailer. I said, okay. So has De Palma knocked on the door and asked him? He said, yeah, we just did that, and we get no answer. He won't talk to anybody. Okay.
Okay.
So remember, movies go by at hundreds of thousands of dollars a day.
Right.
That's the run rate. It's like
Yeah.
taking the world's most expensive taxi.
Yeah, right.
You hit the flag, you get in the car, and boy, by the time that day is over,
Yeah.
you have chalked up some cash.
So if he's killing an hour or something there, that's $20,000, $30,000 that he's just thrown away.
So I get a helicopter and go to fucking Montecito. I'm living in Malibu.
Okay.
It only takes 20 minutes, takes an hour to get the helicopter. But once I get the chopper, I'm there.
Right.
Then I go to the trailer. I knock on the door. I say, Al, it's Tom and thing and stuff. No response.
Yeah.
So I wander around for a while. I tried calling Sydney, by the way, to get advice, and he wasn't available. It's too bad. I think he was shooting somewhere.
Yeah.
In any event, I finally go back and I knock on the door, and I do my very worst Cuban accent.
Yeah.
And I say, Tony. And after a little bit, a voice says, huh? And I said, Tony, it's Tom. Open the door. We got to talk about something. No idea what we got to talk about.
Right.
He opens the door. I go in, I sit down. Mr. Pacino, who is a genius in my estimation, genius actor. I say, what's the matter? He's still in accent. He says, Tom, I got the problem. Okay. Tell me what it is. We'll fix it. Said, well, you know that place. Which place? Place you guys got me to live in. We got him a giant penthouse suite on a skyscraper because of the security things in the Century City area of Los Angeles. He said, the walls of that apartment are stealing my energy. I said, okay, Tony. I got that. I understand that. I pick up the phone in his trailer, and I call the studio. I get my secretary, Seal. And I said, Seal, have a full crew empty Mr. Pacino's apartment today. Tonight, call Carol Raff, lease a house in Malibu Colony. Make sure there's a guard on it in addition to the gate and all the other. Malibu Colony has good security.
Yeah.
And I said, Tony, you're never going to have that happen to you again. And tonight you go home to a house on the beach. And he said, great. And I said, yeah, it's great. Problem solved, thank you. You know, all these guys are waiting out here. Why don't we walk over here and see what Brian's doing? He said, okay, man, let's do that. So we walked to the set.
Wow. What a weird story that is. The walls were stealing his energy. Were they stealing Al Pacino's energy, or were they stealing Tony Montana's energy?
I think Al was Tony Montana and was just in that space. He didn't like the apartment. This was the way it was expressed. It didn't matter to me whether the walls were stealing his energy or whether aliens were landing on the roof of the building.
Or he didn't like the elevator ride, or
I
he didn't
didn't
like the
care
decor.
about any.
Didn't
all
make
I-
any difference.
What I cared about
Getting
was
them
that
out.
Mr. Pacino was protected in his process,
Sure.
whatever that was.
Yeah.
And by the way, was treated with dignity around that process.
Yeah.
I never thought it was funny when an actor was in character.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
In fact, I thought it's a kind of a gift. It's just
Sure.
a huge gift when
Yeah.
they can be in character that way. In any event, that was a rough movie for Al. Also, he was firing a machine gun a lot, as you remember, and it was firing blanks, and the barrel overheated, and then he managed to lean his arm against the barrel of the machine gun and had a huge burn on his arm, which in the middle of the show we had to shut down for a few days to get it thing and back to the point that he could work, and other bits and pieces. The show was very physical. There was a lot of gunfire, a lot of shooting, a lot of running and jumping and stunt work and
Right.
things like that. And so it was not an easy show. Brian De Palma held up really well. The place Brian lost me is when we were having the ratings battle, which meant the difference between releasing the picture or not. Because I had been informed by Mr. Wasserman, the chairman of the company, if I could not get rid of the X rating, they gave us an X,
Yeah.
couldn't get rid of the X rating, we would have to bury the picture. Which, by the way, would also include burying me, although he didn't
Right,
have to say
right,
that. He didn't have
exactly.
to say
It was
that
implied.
out loud. It was
implied, yes.
Yeah. So welcome to Hollywood,
Yeah,
you know?
right.
So then I'm getting to an R rating. I brought in Verna Fields to help. Jerry Greenberg's helping. We're cutting, slicing, and dicing. We finally get down to the shower scene. The shower scene's contracting slightly. We finally get to a moment when I can make a deal. And that day, I make a deal with the ratings board to give us an R. Reluctantly. On that same day, Brian De Palma said to the New York Times in an interview, we're keeping the X. we don't care about the ratings board. We're going to release this
Oh,
as
yeah.
an X anyway.
So
that then
that didn't help.
No. So that was a few days of surus and conversation and this and that and stuff. But however, it was released as an R-rated picture, first in New York, only on the 1st of December, and then on the 9th of December in 900 more screens around the country. We did New York first because we wanted to see if we could get some good reviews. I thought we might. I was disappointed in most of them, but we had a few like that.
I'm surprised that
David
it didn't
Anson
review as well as I thought it was.
Yeah.
I think of it as a classic. You know, it's
Well,
certainly of that era.
it is a cult classic today.
No
you know.
question about it.
You know, so what can I say? It aged well. So I give you 3 films.
Yeah.
Xanadu.
Oh, I can't.
Just
I want to
hang
do.
on. Don't.
What?
Xanadu. Going Berserk.
Don't
and
know that.
DC Cab.
DC Cab, I know.
3 films. All terrible. All failures.
Yeah.
All lost a lot of money.
Right.
So if you're going to do that in your life,
And you did. Those are your
and
movies.
I gave a yes to each one of those movies. God bless
We
me.
have to do an hour on Xanadu.
Oh no.
Yes.
And we'll do. Maybe we'll do that in some format that
Ooh.
doesn't get distributed publicly.
No, people will be
So-
because it's considered one of the worst movies ever made, and yet it's a big glossy film.
It's a big glossy film with some big stars in it,
Yeah.
and thank you, Olivia Newton-John,
Yeah.
which I say every time I think of Xanadu, because
Mm-hmm.
without her brilliant soundtrack,
Yeah.
I would have lost every dime.
Yeah. At least you made some money on the soundtrack.
We made a lot of money on the
Yeah.
soundtrack.
Okay. And we're gonna do that at some point because
All right.
I love the story of a failure just as much as a success.
Bill, I consider that a threat.
Are we done here? Have you?
I think we're done.
Okay, that's it for today. Remember, there are no shortcuts in this show business world, but there are many, many detours. This is Bill Getty with Tom Mount, advising you to take Fountain.